At 0339 on January 19, 1945, the bridge was still there. At 0340, a Soviet scout car rattled across it, engine screaming, tires bouncing on steel. At 0341, the last German truck reached the far bank. 4 engineers in gray coats bent over a bundle of wires. At 0341 and 6 seconds, the bridge stopped being a bridge. The charges went off in one long rolling crack. Concrete split. Steel twisted. For half a second, the whole structure hung in the air like it was trying to remember what it was. Then the middle span folded. A Soviet Jeep, halfway across, had just enough time for the driver to swear once. The front wheels dipped into nothing. The headlights tipped toward the river, and the whole vehicle slid forward in slow motion, carried by its own momentum. It vanished with the falling steel. The men on the east bank heard the Jeep hit the water a heartbeat after the girders, a flat splash lost in the roar of collapsing metal. By 0342, there was no bridge, just a black gap, 34 meters across, 9 meters deep, and behind it, already backing up, already honking, was a column that stretched 15 kilometers back into the ruined Polish town they just fought through. Tanks, trucks, guns, fuel, 10,000 men. On a map, it looked simple. One thin blue line for a river, one neat black bar over it, marked in clean print. Bridge, steel, 3-span. Behind it, a symbol for the 19th Guards Rifle Division. Ahead of it, the arrow of the offensive, pointing west. In reality, at 0342, the neat black bar didn't exist anymore. There was only a chasm and a traffic jam. And on both flanks, closing in like a pair of slow, patient jaws, were German forces who could read maps just as well as the Soviets could. If the 19th Guards didn't get over the Widawa before dawn, they wouldn't be a division anymore. They'd be a footnote. Unit encircled and destroyed east of the Widawa. Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Zorin was awake when the bridge died. He felt the demolition in his teeth. He was hunched in the back of a Studebaker truck 1 kilometer from the river, a blanket over his shoulders and a map on his knees, when the night lit up white at the horizon and the shock waves slapped the canvas. A muffled double boom, then a long metallic groan that seemed to go on forever. He didn't need to see it to know what it was. They don't blow ammunition like that, he thought. That's a span going down. Maybe 2. He put a pencil mark on the map where the sound had come from. He wrote 3 words next to it without thinking. Bridge. Gone. Problem. Then somebody tore the canvas open. Engineers to the front, a voice screamed. Bridge is out. Get Zorin. He was already moving. Up close, problem was too small a word. The east bank of the Widawa was a mess of mud, ice, and panic. Truck headlights washed over twisted steel. Men shouted into field phones that weren't working. Someone's staff car lay on its side in the ditch, still ticking and pinging as the engine cooled. And in the middle of it all, where the map said there should be a bridge, was a smoking hole in the world. The first span on the Soviet side still clung to the east abutment at a sick angle. One end dropped toward the water like a broken arm. The next 2 spans were gone, their skeletons lying half submerged in the black current below. Steam rose from the river where hot steel met winter water. Zorin walked straight to the edge of the broken concrete, boots scraping on gravel, and looked down. The cold bit his face. The wind bit his ears. The numbers bit his brain. Span length, 34 meters. He knew it. He'd walked this bridge 3 days ago, boots counting panels. River width at the crossing, 30 to 32 meters, bank to bank, plus a meter of soft edge on each side. Depth now, in January, with snowmelt and rain, 8 to 9 meters in the center. Too deep to ford, too fast to cheat. Behind him, an officer grabbed his sleeve. "Lieutenant," the man shouted, "the division is backed up all the way into town. The pontoons are stuck behind the wreckage. The Germans are on our left. They're probing on the right. And if we're still on this side of the river by morning—" "We won't be," Zorin said. The officer blinked. "We won't?" "We can't afford to be," Zorin said. "So we won't." He pulled his sleeve free and walked closer to the drop, ignoring the curses behind him. From the east bank, the collapse looked like total destruction. From where Zorin crouched, toes on the edge of the broken span, it looked like material. The wreckage hadn't vanished. One section of the old bridge lay diagonally across the current, its lower chords still tied to a surviving pier. Another had folded into a twisted bundle of steel, maybe 12 meters long and 3 high, wedged against the first. Loads, members, bearing paths. His mind started doing what it always did when something big and heavy stopped being where it was meant to be. On paper, this was a dead bridge. In his head, it was a kit. Far back along the road, a German battery opened up. 3 shells landed short of the crossing, throwing up pillars of mud and dirty water. The 4th hit the slope near the second truck in line and turned it into an expanding ball of orange and black. Men threw themselves flat by reflex. The truck twisted, jumped, and crashed onto its side, leaking fire. They've got the road, Zorin thought. They'll walk the fire up the column. He glanced back. Tail lights and dimmed headlights snaked into the darkness. A glowing, crooked line 3 meters wide and, on his map, 15 kilometers long. Tanks, fuel, ammunition, people. On an aerial photograph, it would look like what it was. A perfect target. He checked his watch. 03:52. If they stayed here, he gave them maybe 30 minutes before that target was properly serviced. He did not have 30 minutes, so he gave himself 10. "Sergeant!" he shouted. A stocky man with a shaved head and a greatcoat cut too short for regulation scrambled up beside him. Senior Sergeant Kravchuk. Welder. Complainer. Miracle worker when bribed with tobacco. "Look," Zorin said, pointing down at the wreckage. "What do you see?" Kravchuk squinted into the darkness. His breath steamed in the air. "I see a river full of twisted steel," he said, "and I see us dying on the wrong bank while we admire German demolition work. Look harder." Another German salvo came in. One shell hit short in the water. The impact lit the understructure of the fallen bridge for a second in ghostly white. The twisted spans shook, rang, did not move. Kravchuk frowned. "It's still anchored on that pier," he said slowly. "And the far cords? They're taking load. Not enough for a truck, maybe. Enough for themselves. If you don't breathe on it. How much weight do you think they can share?" Kravchuk shrugged. "Depends where you put it. You planning to walk the division over that? We don't have enough priests." "Not the division," Zorin said. "One tank at a time." Kravchuk stared at him. "Over that?" "Yes." "You're insane." "Yes," Zorin said. "Go get the cutting team. We need straight panels from whatever isn't underwater. Minimum 5 meters long. Torches, saws, teeth, anything that cuts steel. And don't fall in. I can replace steel." Kravchuk spat for luck and scrambled down toward the half-submerged girders. Zorin turned around and looked at the road. He saw what everyone else saw. Chaos. He saw something else. Inventory. Fuel drums lashed to a truck. Telephone poles stacked in a ditch. A barn still pretending to be a house. Ammo crates. Doors. Wire. To most officers, It was junk. To him, it was buoyancy. It was decking. It was tension. It was a bridge. It just didn't know it yet. There are two kinds of combat engineer. Ones who read the manual and wait for the right equipment, and ones who stand over a destroyed bridge at 0352, hear artillery finding the range, look at a river full of broken steel, and think, good. The enemy just did half my work for me. Zorin had been the second kind since 19, when he'd stolen a railway company's scaffolding to rebuild a blown culvert in one night. He knew exactly what he was supposed to do now. Report that the bridge was destroyed. Wait for the pontoon regiment. If the pontoons couldn't get through, someone very far away would decide which units tried to ford somewhere else, which ones marched as infantry, which ones were written off as encircled. He also knew exactly how many of the men stuck on this road that plan was going to kill. He didn't have the authority to change the plan, but he had one thing more important than authority in that moment. He had time. Not much of it. Just enough to commit a crime. He gave himself 10 minutes to either build something insane or die trying. In the next 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Senior Lieutenant Zorin stole enough state property to be shot twice. He had soldiers roll 14 fuel drums off a ZIS-5 and kick them down the slope. He had a platoon of exhausted infantry rip planks off a wrecked farmhouse in 20 seconds, turning the building into a skeleton of naked beams. He commandeered 2 telegraph poles, 3 doors, 11 empty ammunition crates, a coil of field telephone wire, and 1 very offended colonel's wooden table. He did not explain. There wasn't time. "Boards! 2 meters!" he shouted. "Crates! Empty them. I don't care where the shells go. Just give me the boxes. Check the drums for leaks. If one of them floats us on petrol fumes, I'll haunt you personally." At 0358, a German shell found the road 200 meters back. The blast flipped a truck onto its side like a kicked toy. A wheel spun in the air, useless. Wooden sides shattered, spraying splinters and burning canvas down the slope. Men dropped flat. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed, high and hysterical. Zorin staggered, coughed mud out of his throat, and checked his watch again. 0359. The Germans had the range. The next salvos would walk up the column like someone wiping a chalk line off a blackboard. Down in the riverbed, torches spat blue-white flame. Sparks rained as Kravchuk's team cut straight sections out of the ruins of the old spans. By 0401, they had 3 panels, 5.2 meters, 5.4, 5.1, narrow ribs of lattice steel, edges glowing where the torch had kissed them. "Good," Zorin said, panting. "We need 1 more. Then we build." "Build what?" Kravchuk demanded, sweat and river spray freezing on his face. "You can't cantilever 34 meters with this trash." "Who said anything about cantilevering?" Zorin pointed at the drums bobbing at the water's edge, lashed together in clumsy pairs with wire and rope. "Pontoons," he said. "We build our own pontoons." "Out of fuel barrels and stolen bridge?" "Yes." "Under fire?" "Yes." "You're insane," Kravchuk said again. "Yes," Zorin said. "Now help me lift." The idea was simple enough that it might work, and stupid enough that nobody else would try it. The Germans had done them a favor. The old bridge wasn't gone. It was just bent. Its remains still reached almost halfway across the river, anchored to the east bank and 2 surviving piers. Zorin didn't need to magic a whole new span out of thin air. He needed to extend the wreck. Step 1. Turn the fuel drums into floating supports. 7 pairs, lashed together in 2s, each pair a rough cylinder 1.2 meters long. 0.6 wide, with enough buoyancy to keep 600 kilograms of steel and timber from sinking outright. Step 2. Turn the salvaged panels into a continuous track, 3/4 of a meter wide, bolted, wired, nailed into a spine that ran from the broken east span to the farthest pile of twisted steel near mid-river. Step 3. Nail the whole mess to the old bridge and pray that, for the next 2 hours, the Widawa did not decide to become an engineer. It was not a textbook solution. It was not even a bad training exercise. It was a dare thrown at gravity and water. A T-34 weighed around 26 tons. Spread over its tracks, that was roughly 0.8 to 1 kilogram per square centimeter. The original bridge had been designed for that. This thing was not. But if the drums floated just right, if the load bled into the remaining girders where he thought it would, and if the driver did not panic halfway across, it might hold once. One tank, one crossing. That was all he needed. If the first made it, the rest would follow nose to tail, 30 tons at a time. If the first dropped into the river, 26 tons of steel would rip the entire contraption apart and drag it down with it. Nobody would live long enough to file a complaint. At 0403, under incoming shells and the flat bangs of airbursts walking closer, they shoved the first chain of drums into place. The river grabbed them at once, slapping them sideways, trying to tear them free. Ropes creaked, wire bit into metal. The drums bobbed, settled. They slid the first glowing panel out over them, bolting its near end to the mangled edge of the old span. For a breathless second, the steel sagged under its own weight, dipping toward the water. Then the drums took the load. The panel steadied. "Next," Zorin grunted. They laid the second. The lattices overlapped by half a meter, tied together with whatever they had. Bridge bolts, rebar, even a bent rifle cleaning rod, hammered through 2 holes and twisted over with pliers. More drums, more wire, more stolen wood jammed between steel and barrel to stop things from rolling. By 0407, another shell had hit the road above them. The blast wave rolled down the slope and hit them like a wet fist, knocking boys to their knees. Somewhere up there, a fuel truck was burning. The air took on the thick, greasy sweetness of cooked petrol. "Faster!" Zorin yelled, though he knew their arms had already run out of faster 3 minutes ago. The third panel went on. Now the improvised bridge reached from the broken east span out over mid-river, a narrow, shivering line of steel and barrels. The gap that remained to the nearest usable chunk of wrecked bridge on the far side was a little over 6 meters. Too far. The fourth panel was 5.3. Zorin stared at the numbers in his head. 5.3. 6 plus. He looked up at the original span still half attached on their side. Its far end hung low, almost touching the water, like a broken arm reaching down. That's it, he thought. We don't span the gap. We drop into it. We hinge it, he said aloud. We bolt the last panel to that hanging end and let it swing down onto the drums. When the tank comes, its weight will jam it into place. Kravchuk gaped at him. That's not a bridge. That's a bear trap. For who? Depends who's heavier, Kravchuk muttered. It just has to hold once, Zorin said. After that, we're committed anyway. He didn't say the rest. After that, nobody will be in a position to criticize my calculations. They hauled the fourth panel up, bolted it to the end of the sloping span, and cut the last safety rope. The whole assembly creaked, swung down in a slow arc, and thumped onto the waiting drums with a wet, hollow bang. For one terrifying second, it bounced, slid, and nearly rolled. Then the ropes, the wire, The jammed planks, the friction, everything bit at once. The panel stayed. An ugly, crooked line of steel now ran from cracked concrete to twisted wreckage on the far side of the black water. It did not look like a bridge. It looked like a bad idea made solid. "Will it hold?" someone whispered. Zorin looked at it, feeling the weight of the river, the steel, the drums, the thousands of tons of vehicles waiting behind them. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know what happens if we don't try." At 0411, the sky in the east was starting to pale. Dawn was coming. With it, German spotters who wouldn't have to guess anymore where the road was. Tank engines were revving on the slope. Trucks crawled back and forth, trying to form a queue that looked less like panic. Someone had finally shouted loud enough that officers started pushing vehicles into order. It was almost too late. Zorin climbed back up onto the broken abutment. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. He waved his arms at the nearest tank, a T-34 waiting 50 meters back, gun barrel pointing dumbly over the heads of the crowd. "Here," he yelled, pointing to the edge of the concrete. "Straight ahead, slow, don't stop, don't steer, don't look down." The tank clanked forward, tracks rattling on fractured asphalt. The driver's face appeared for a second in the open hatch. A kid with soot on his cheeks and eyes too big for his skull. He grinned down at Zorin, because from up there, it still looked like a joke. "Is there really a bridge?" he shouted. Zorin slapped the glasses with his palm. "There is," he said. "For you, there is." The T-34 rolled past him and onto the broken span. Concrete became twisted steel under its tracks. Twisted steel became something worse, the beginning of a bridge that did not, officially, exist. And then, with a final clank and a small, almost delicate jump, 30 tons of tank left solid earth and drove out over a freezing river on fuel drums, wreckage, and one combat engineer's bad idea. The first tank rolled out like it didn't know it was doing something impossible. Tracks clattered on broken concrete, then on twisted steel. The nose dipped as it reached the edge of the ruined span. Then there was nothing under it but cold air, black water, and a line of steel and fuel drums that did not, officially, exist. From inside the tank, the driver saw none of that. He saw only a shaking slit of road and the back of his own hands, but he felt it. The moment when the hull left solid ground, when the usual vibration of earth under steel turned into a thin, strange hum coming up through the floor. Metal under him. Water under that. Air under everything. His instincts screamed to stop. He couldn't. There was nowhere to stop to. Behind him, 30 tons of tank were already committed. Behind that, 15 kilometers of vehicles and men were waiting for someone to prove that the bridge either worked or didn't. "Straight ahead," Zorin yelled from the broken abutment, voice raw. "No steering, no brakes." The tank's nose reached the hinged panel. For a half second, the whole world became one sound, the scream of steel. The hanging panel slammed fully down onto the waiting drums. The extra weight drove it into place, jamming it tight against the improvised supports. The drums bobbed, dove, and then fought their way back up, straining under the load. The bridge flexed, not a little, a lot. Men on the bank watched the line of steel dip visibly toward the water under the tank's weight. Someone swore. Someone crossed themselves. Someone else turned away, unable to watch. The T-34 crept forward, tracks squealing. Each link bit into a lattice that was never meant to carry it. Each bite shifted the load a few centimeters further along the broken skeleton of the old span. The river surged, annoyed at being made into part of the plan. Halfway across, a German shell landed just upstream. It hit the water with a flat, vicious crump. The blast slapped the fuel drums sideways. Spray hammered the underside of the panels. For a heartbeat, the tank skated, weight shifting as if it might slide right off the narrow track. Inside, the driver stomped both feet by reflex. The tank lurched. On the bank, Zorin's heart stopped. If the driver threw a panic brake now, the nose would dig, the rear would swing, and 30 tons of steel would lever the whole fragile creation straight into the Widawa. He cupped his hands around his mouth and screamed one word, "Go!" He didn't know if the driver heard him or the universe, but the tank did what it was told. It crawled. 1 meter, 2, 5. The flex in the bridge eased as the weight crossed the center and started to come down on the far side of the wreckage. On the western bank, the remains of the far pier groaned, took the load, and held. The tank's nose climbed. Broken steel became muddy concrete under the tracks again. The T-34 dragged itself onto the far shore, its exhaust blowing a dirty white cloud back across the river. For a moment, nobody on either bank breathed. Then someone on the far side waved both arms and shouted the one word everyone was waiting for. "Across!" The second tank went without being asked. Its driver had watched the first one disappear into the dark and come back out again. That was all the faith he needed. By the time it reached the broken span, the bridge had already sagged another 2 centimeters at mid-river. The drums were riding lower, their painted sides now kissing the current instead of bobbing above it. Zorin knew that if he let his mind do the math, he might vomit. So he didn't. He counted instead. He marked every crossing like a notch in his skull. First tank, second, third. The third's tracks clanged down onto the hinged panel with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. One of the ropes on the nearest pair of drums snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The barrels twisted, tried to roll. A door stolen from a farmhouse, jammed between steel and metal, bit down and held them in place. "Good door," Kravchuk muttered under his breath, white fog pouring out of his mouth. By the 6th tank, the bridge was no longer just a thing they had built. It was something alive. It groaned. It flexed. It protested every new load. But it did not break. German gunners are not stupid. By the time the third tank climbed the far bank, they had realized something was wrong. The division that was supposed to be trapped was not acting trapped. Their shells walked along the road, over the waiting trucks, then past them. They started hunting for whatever insane solution the Soviets had found this time. The 4th salvo straddled the river. One shell hit short, throwing up a wall of water and smoke just downstream of the bridge. Another hit the east bank, near the line of waiting vehicles, flipping a Studebaker onto its nose. A third shell landed dangerously close above the far pier, showering the first tanks with earth and shrapnel as they rolled off. Shards of steel whined through the air around Zorin. One piece punched through the broken span 2 meters from his boots. Another tore a furrow in the concrete and buried itself. "Lieutenant," someone yelled, "we can't keep this up under direct fire." "We're not keeping it up," Zorin shouted back. "We're getting off it." He pointed across the river. "Every tank that makes it across can suppress those guns. The faster they go, the fewer shells we eat here." On the far bank, the first T-34 was already slewing into position. guns swinging toward the flickering muzzles in the distance. If the bridge failed now, if the rest died on this side, at least the ones who had made it over would have teeth. That was the wager. They switched to trucks after the 9th tank. It wasn't strategy. It was necessity. The drums were riding so low that water licked over their tops with every new crossing. The welded joints on the panels were starting to show hairline cracks. "I don't trust it with another 30 tons, Kravchuk snapped. "Not unless you want to find out what a T-34 looks like from underneath." "Fine," Zorin said. "Trucks next, one at a time, nothing heavier than 3 tons. And if any driver so much as taps his brake, I'll shoot him before the river does." Word spread fast. Some drivers refused. They were brave men. They would charge a machine gun nest. They would drive under air attack. But inching a half-broken truck full of ammunition over a river on fuel barrels and scrap bridge in the dark, that was a different kind of courage. Zorin didn't argue with them. He simply spoke to the ones behind. "If he won't go," he said, "you take his place. And his truck." No one wanted to be the one who turned back when the man behind was willing to go forward. The line started to move again. A truck with wounded. A truck with mortar rounds. Another with bread and dried fish that suddenly felt as important as shells. Each one eased onto the bridge, wood sides rattling, drivers staring straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. Each one made it across, tires thumping on steel, bouncing on planks, then hitting solid ground with a sound that made men want to cry with relief. The bridge did not fail in one dramatic cinematic moment. It failed like most things in war do, slowly, then all at once. After the 17th vehicle, one of the pairs of drums took a fragment in the side. A neat, angry little hole. Petrol fumes and water sprayed out together. The barrel began to sink in tiny, stubborn centimeters. Zorin saw it and ordered lighter loads only. No more tanks. No more full fuel trucks. Anything with broken springs or worn tires got waved to the back of the line. By 0506, the sky in the east was the color of old paper. Shapes were becoming silhouettes. On the far bank, there was now not just a handful of vehicles, but a knot. A cluster of tanks and guns turning west, fanning out, starting to bite at the German flanks. The jaws that had been closing around the 19th Guards were suddenly meeting something hard and sharp. Artillery that had been firing on the road had to decide. Keep hammering the crossing, or turn to face the tanks now appearing like ghosts out of the mist on their side of the river. They did what all artillery does when threatened. They tried to do both, badly. Their fire on the road slackened. That bought the bridge a few more minutes of life. In the end, it was Zorin who took the last crossing. Not because he wanted to, because someone had to know when to stop. "Lieutenant, that's it," Kravchuk said, voice hoarse. "The drums are almost under. The panels are singing. One more truck, and the whole thing goes." "How many made it?" Zorin asked. Kravchuk squinted through the smoke and mist. "Enough," he said. "More than none." It wasn't the answer Zorin wanted. It was the only one he had. He looked back at the east bank. There were still vehicles there. There were always still vehicles. War never finished loading. But the worst of the column, the heavy stuff, the fuel, the guns that mattered, had made it over. And the Germans were now losing guns and men on their side of the river to tanks that, from their point of view, had appeared out of thin air. "Pull the men off," Zorin said quietly. "Everyone across who can walk. We're done feeding it." "What about you?" Kravchuk asked. Zorin looked at the improvised bridge. At the drums riding so low they seemed more underwater than on it. At the panels bent in tired arcs. At the ropes that had sawn halfway through their own knots. "I'll lock the door behind us," he said. He climbed onto a little gas truck that was more holes than metal by now, its bed piled with what remained of the engineer company's tools. A ridiculous last load. Wrenches, cables, a welding torch. He eased it forward, tires crunching on broken concrete. When the front wheels hit the twisted steel of the broken span, his hands wanted to shake. He kept them still. He drove. Out over the water. Out over his own crime. The bridge flexed under him like it was breathing its last. He could feel every drum, every bolt, every piece of stolen wood working under the weight. Halfway across, he heard a sound he'd been dreading since 0352. A long, low, tearing groan. Not from the panels, from the old span itself. The main cords of the original bridge, warped and cracked, were finally complaining about the abuse. "Just a few more meters," Zorin muttered, as if the steel could hear him. "You've carried worse. One more run." The truck crawled, engine whining. At the far end, the wheels hit twisted steel, then the broken edge of the western abutment, then dirt. Solid, boring, wonderful dirt. He didn't stop the truck until he was 50 meters from the bank. He climbed down. Behind him, the improvised bridge lay under the first gray light of dawn, a black zigzag over black water. It held for almost another minute, long enough for him to stand and watch it breathe. Then one of the barrel pairs, the one with the shell hole, finally lost its fight with physics. It dipped. The panel above it sagged, then slid, then tore free. Like a pulled thread, the whole structure began to come apart, sections peeling away, drums rolling, panels twisting. In less than 30 seconds, the bridge that had not existed at 0341 and had saved a division between 0403 and 0510 was gone. All that remained were ripples and a few stubborn bits of dangling steel. If a stranger had walked up to the river at 0515 with a map in his hands, he would have seen exactly what the map showed: a river, no bridge. He might even have said, "Impossible. There's no way they crossed here." He would have been half right. The manuals would have agreed with him. But the tanks and trucks now grinding west on the far bank, and the German guns now dying under their fire, were a different kind of documentation. Months later, far from the Widawa, some staff officer in some warm office read a dry report with an unremarkable title: "On the Use of Improvised Floating Supports in Emergency River Crossings." There were no photographs, just diagrams, numbers, fuel drums sketched in neat pairs, lattice girders in thin pencil lines, arrows showing force distribution. Somewhere in an appendix, in small type, was a line that said, "Case study based on crossing conducted by 19th Guards Rifle Division, January 1945. Bridge Commander, Senior Lieutenant M.A. Zorin." His name did not go on any medal list. No one made a film about him. There was no decoration for constructed an unapproved bridge out of stolen junk under artillery fire and then drove over at last. But years later, when other wars came and other engineers stood on other broken banks, they did the same kind of crime. They lashed barrels together. They threw doors and planks and scrap steel over wreckage. They looked at something destroyed and saw not an obstacle, but parts. And somewhere, buried in doctrine and habit, in the unspoken culture of combat engineers, lived the same quiet idea. When the book says, "Wait for proper equipment," and the river says, "No," and the enemy says, "You're out of time," there is still one answer left. You build a bridge that shouldn't exist, and you let it live just long enough to prove the map wrong.